Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for the Go for Leadership podcast. Today with me is Peter Griffiths and I'm happy to have you on board.
Well, thanks for having me.
Go for Leadership interviews.
Peter, like always, our first question goes around introducing yourself. So you have 30 seconds to give us a glimpse. Who is Peter?
Yeah, no worries. Yes, I'm a leadership coach and a creativity consultant, you could say. So my main aim is to impact and help leaders become more human-centric. And instead of sustaining the old kind of dogma that's out there, I'm into more regenerative practices, if that makes sense.
Awesome. I love that. And that's the right topic. So we talk about leadership in our podcast. So maybe you can give your own definition, or what is your passion about leadership? So first, how would you define leadership and what is your passion about leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. So for me, the definition of leadership is simply just to be of service. Mm-hmm. You know, because many people get given the role of a people manager, but they're not necessarily the right person, right? So the first question I always ask people who come to me and say, how can I be a better leader, is how can you be of service to your people? How can you help them, you know, to feel safe and included and listened to, so they're able and free to do their best work without all of the stuff that innocently gets in the mix and gets in the way, such as micromanagement and not being able to delegate and a lack of trust, right?
I love that. What is your passion about leadership? Why you have so much, let's say, what drives you on a day-to-day basis, helping those leaders? What is the passion? I want to understand.
I just love this subject. I never get bored of it. I've been a leader on and off for 20 years before I co-founded the Mind Takeaway with Mira. And I just love the fact that when you light someone up and you show them a way forward, and like I say, it points back to psychological safety and being of service, you just see what people can do for other people. And for me, it's a game of really lighting other individuals up. Small changes ripple outwards. So if you can impact one person and help them to grow, you know, that person will not really forget that. You know, everyone remembers the really bad bosses, right? It's quite easy, you know, the person that was bullying or micromanaging you. But what about the people in your life, like the mentors or the people you could go to, or just allowed you and trusted you to do your best work? Sometimes the best leaders are in the background. They're so subtle, you know, they only step forward when they're required, when they need to give you feedback, or for example, you fail and they're there to help you learn from, you know, what can we do together going forward? What can we do better the next time that you do that particular thing that you're doing, right?
I love that. So let's us stick into that topic. So do you think that these days the leader that are currently out there have this empathy to really serve? Because I have in my experience, there is a lack of this servant leadership that you describe, and I completely agree, and I would love that we would have much more of them.
Yeah, you know what, if I'm really honest, I mean, in the game that I'm in, helping people, I'm talking to colleagues all the time. You know, my clients are a little bit more switched on than the normal, I would say, people manager. However, I still think we've got a long way to go. And that's why I'm so passionate about this subject, because I know that although there are wonderful leaders out there, people who really just light people up, they're more like light the touch paper and step away. And you just see what their teams can do. You know, it's a team that's under pressure versus a high performing team that's just allowed to do the best work, and you can just see the difference in the results, right? So do I believe there's more work to do? Yeah, I mean, I really do think people can be a little bit more empathetic and passionate. And we all, I mean, I made this mistake. We can all get a bit impatient, right? And when we're under pressure, especially during COVID, it's even more important to look in on your people and have the back. Because if they don't have someone there to protect them and help them go forward and learn together, they're more likely just to not do the work that you want. And then you end up course correcting, giving more feedback. And let's be honest, you end up with double the amounts of work. So if you're compassionate and you're showing empathy and you're showing patience and you're really growing that team, you're more likely to get the results that you want. And again, I know it sounds really obvious, right? But it's amazing how many people don't really think that part through, right?
Absolutely. So do you think that in particular, as you were touching the topic of COVID, that in this challenging times where you have this huge level of uncertainty, this huge level of exogenous forces, let's say, impacting your organization, your team, your company, that the the good leaders stand up, and that you see really the performance of people or teams that show that level of empathy, of the interest of your people? Can you give
Yeah, I
some
would agree.
examples?
An example, well, the people that I speak to in terms of organization and some of my clients right now, they're really putting the red carpet down. They're really protecting their people. They're checking in more often. But the crucial thing is they're asking their people what they want, right? This
Hmm.
is the difference between people management and leadership. You go in there, and even though you can't do everything, you're being transparent and you're being honest with your people and saying, look, I don't have all the answers, but what's going to make sense for you to feel safe during this time? What can I do without having to stand over your shoulder and make you paranoid and think that I'm checking in on you when you just need to get on with your work? Because right now, let's be honest, it's challenging for everyone, even me too, right? We don't know when this COVID thing's going to end. So the best gift you can give your people right now is just to find a baseline for your team, and at an individual level, what's going to be meaningful for them to feel protected, safe, listened to, and included, to be free to do their best work. And it's as simple as just asking the right kind of questions, right?
Hmm.
And it's amazing that the clients that I've got that are doing that, or the companies that I'm speaking to, they're the companies that are going to be there in the next 5 to 10 years. Anyone that's not doing that, where, for example, they're using software to monitor the teams, which is completely nonsensical to me. This is a time for trust. Even I'll give you a really tangible example. A team I used to run in the Middle East, this was a decade ago. Even though I was a bit fearful and I didn't really know them when I actually inherited half of this team, I just knew that the best way I could actually get impact from these people and grow this team and nourish them and coach them and make sure that they can actually produce the results and hit the KPIs was to just trust them immediately. And the team itself, they didn't trust me yet. I was a new manager. But over time, because I had the back and they could see that I was allowing wiggle room for them to grow, make mistakes, but in a controlled way where we could sit down together, we could unpack what had happened. And mistakes did happen, there were some calamities. But the difference is they realized that I actually had the back. And the only way that you can really do that as a leader is you have to go there first. So another part of that was that if I didn't trust myself to do the role, or for example, it was obvious that in one way I was saying, I trust you, but behind the back, I was checking in too much or trying to micromanage these people, the results wouldn't have been as impactful and it would have been a lot more difficult. And like I said before, if you don't do it that way, you end up with more than double the amount of work, right? And an uphill struggle in most cases.
Absolutely agree. So do you think that this level of, let's say, of close relationship building between the leader and the staff or the team, there is, let's say, or is it more difficult, let's say, in a remote setting than in a physical setting, do you think?
That's a great question. And thanks for asking that, because this is probably the most common challenge that leaders have right now. And actually, I'm doing a workshop about that tomorrow because it's another passion project for me. So remote management is more challenging, let's be honest, because, for example, when I think back to the first gig I had, having a team, not just that were actually not in the office, but they were in 3 different countries, it was actually quite challenging because I'm like, okay, how can I really make sure that people are doing the best work? How can I look after them? How can I coach and support them? Well, it goes back to what I said before. You need to just ask questions. So you're a new team, for example, if you just inherited a team, or you know, before COVID happened, you never actually had that experience. The first thing I did was get together those people. And that's the first thing I tell my clients is, well, what's going to be meaningful to you, to go and ask them, what can you do to support them during this time? And most teams realize that actually it's around checking in more often. So finding a baseline for having an extra meeting in the week, for example, where you're not just smashing through targets and numbers and presentations and all the business critical stuff. Because I would argue that the non-business related things, like checking in on a human level and just saying, look, how are you? We know that it's a bit crazy. What's going on at home? Let's talk about something else. And that's when people just come alive, because that's the kind of thing that will save you in the future. You can't just 24/7 look at, if you're working on a project and all of the moving parts of that. You need to step out of that work sometimes and just check in on a human level. And that's what usually helps people grow and helps teams settle during these times, because everyone gets stressed and burnt out. It happens, right? Even before COVID, we were all going too fast, and we all have targets, KPIs, and time. The time's ticking kind of thing. But the more that you check in and just ask the right questions with your team, the easier it is to be able to do your job. And then when things go wrong, your team are more willing to check in with you and say, look, this didn't work, versus the other things where people go behind your back. Or worse still, if a lot of my clients say to me, what do we do about communication? I said, well, as long as people are coming to you with the problems, with the challenges, that's fine. Address it, listen to them, take the time, give your people a gift of time. If that information stops and all of a sudden you find that it's gone quiet, that's when you need to worry. Because if people are not checking in and communicating with you, you've got a problem, right? And that's the thing. People are, sorry, go on. Yeah.
No. I love that that saying, because in particular you mentioned in the former answer that trust is essential, let's say, for building up a team and relationship. Yeah. And I always say that the trust is the kit between people. It's the essence or the starting point of each relationship. And of course, it's also that that I think it's the foundation of everything that can come on top. So maybe you can also give me kind of some other traits or skills that you believe a good leader would need to have in order to build up a performance team.
Mm-hmm. Well, you need to be a good listener. Mm-hmm. And this isn't just listening with a quick reply and being clever. It's actually, I used to do that quite often, and then you realize that that's not going to give you the impact. So it's listening to understand. It's listening and then just clearing your diary to actually give your people individual gift of time, whether it's one-on-one or collectively in meetings, and then just listening to the pulse of your team. That will save you so much, because once they know that you've actually got your attention, that's when they'll actually more likely do the hard work. So if your back's against the wall and suddenly, you've got to do some hard work, your team are more likely to actually do it for you, because they know that you've actually been listening to them. The other bit as well is how you communicate, because nowadays we have so many ways of doing it, right? Digital and non-digital. And right now, lots of my clients are saying, how do I communicate? They're at home, what do I do? And the simple answer is use all of the mediums available. But again, listen to your team, check in, because if you're over communicating, if you're having too many meetings, which it happens quite often, right? It's a common gripe in the corporate world, then you're actually detracting from high performance. I'd much rather have minimal meetings. And, if there's course correction required or something goes wrong, then stuff can happen ad hoc, versus cramming the week with too much stuff like that. And then people actually can't do the important work that they were paid to do, right? And it might sound really obvious, but companies get it so wrong. And even in my corporate career, honestly, half of the time I was in meetings versus when I knew that I should be out there actually getting some of this work done, Yeah.
And I think that's also a very important, that's a challenge that these days I see, that of course with everything is set up as a meeting, right? Because you need to have it and bring it into your calendar. And formerly it was the nice talk during a coffee, the nice side talk with a colleague. It was really doing the impact, right? You get the things resolved fast. You put the thing on the spot, and you didn't needed to search a spot in the calendar for maybe next week for 30 minutes. And then there are 5 or 10 people blocked for 10 minutes, but maybe it's only a part of them that are really required in order to get the problem solved. So Do you experience similar phenomena?
Yeah, and if I'm honest, before I left the corporate world, I was quite famous for just not being in meetings, and I used to get into trouble. So for people listening, I know it's a challenge. You shouldn't be disrespectful. I used to communicate it that, look, I'm going to come to this meeting, but actually, I'm going to leave at this time. Because I don't know if you've thought about this, but another thing that leaders really struggle with is setting their own personal boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And if the people above you or your boss doesn't like that, then you need to sit down and have the courage to have some meaningful conversations around it. Because there are meetings that, yes, there's no way you can negotiate not being there, right? We all know that. But I would hazard a guess, if you're really honest with yourself, if you check in with your team and your function, and depending on how much, how big the operation is you're working in, you'll probably be able to get some efficiencies back. And it is possible, but it does require everyone sitting down and being honest. And I don't know what you think about this, but I'm completely comfortable with conflict as a leader. And this is what I try and instill into my clients when we do leadership development, that just because you don't agree with another person, actually that's okay. As long as you're actually having, open dialogue and there's a human connection there, things can be resolved. And if you look at for example, a high performing team, if you were to sit on a fly in the wall and just look in on them, sometimes it's a mess. Sometimes there is conflict, but then that conflict is resolved individually between the team members because there's psychological safety there. And people say to me, what is psychological safety? It's just what we pointed to, allowing people, to trust them to do their best work, checking in on them, making sure self-care is at the forefront. So for you individually first as a leader, and then saying to people, look, I think you're a bit burned, stop this for now, check out, go home. And I know it's difficult because I don't know what you think about this, but right now I see people burning out even more because there is no going home, right? We're not commuting. So I see people saying, yeah, boss, I'm going to check out, no problem. And then they're innocently working until 9:30 at night, just glazed over, looking at the screen, still dealing with emails. So again, a good leader spots that and will actually, you can't force people, but you'll check in and say, look, I know you pushed the hours last night, well done, but can you not do that during the week? I've got your back. I'd rather you spend time with your son, go and get some fresh air, walk the dog or something like that, because I'd much rather people came in fresh than, smashing the hours, because then it leads to complete chaos. And I've seen that in quite a few organizations I worked in. And actually, in the past, I actually got sucked into that myself. So I can say from experience that just putting the hours in as a badge of honor really doesn't equal productivity. In fact, I'd argue right now that, I don't know what you think about this, but I'm an advocate for the 4-day week. I really am, because anyone that's got a high performing team knows that it's a few hours during the day, you're getting the high impact stuff done. Arguably, the rest of the time, is that really high productivity? Are you getting anything meaningful done, or is it just, filling those holes with, as I said, the meetings and the stuff that's nice to have, right?
I love that aspect, and I just want to pick some of them. One thing I loved about your comment was that I think friction in a team is even required, like you mentioned, in order to come to a good result. Right? If you have only yes sayers and you have not the right diversity in your team, I think it's very hard to come to the best result you can get. It's just maybe the fastest result or the fastest idea that comes and gets executed, but it most likely is not the best. So how do you, let's say, steer or manage those frictions, let's say, into collaborative way, let's say it this way? Because also there can be, let's say, very friction and at the end with no result. The trick though is, right, to get to some kind of result.
Well, the friction is okay as long as you as a leader are facilitating that friction to then resolve, right? Mm-hmm. And there's times when, again, you have to it's experiential learning. So the short and fast of it is, it won't happen overnight. But I'll give you a tangible example. I had a team in the Middle East where I inherited a few. The rest I recruited from zero. And like I said before, it was actually remote. So they were actually in different countries as well. So it was a bit of a challenge. And then throw in the mix of the culture shock in the Middle East, where in general, the people that I had, depending on the nationalities, were kind of calling me Mister, which I was really uncomfortable with. I came from a telco in the UK. and everyone called each other by first name. So it was a bit of a shock to me. And then they were sitting on their hands, even though they were really talented individual people, because I looked into them and, started to look at, what can I do? How can I get the best out of these people? But they were waiting for me every day, waiting for me to tell them exactly what to do. So initially it was quite hard. And also there was a bit of infighting between them and they didn't trust each other. So you have to go there first. So the first thing it did was say, look, I know that this is what you might be used to, but we're going to do it differently. And, at first they did resist and it was uncomfortable. And they were like, why would we do this? And I said, well, why would you not? Would you rather do it this way? And then I showed them exactly what the benefits were, tangible. As a leader, you have to go there first. So it is a bit of patience and it will be challenging, but it's worth every second of doing that versus trying to get there by rushing it. There aren't any shortcuts when it comes to creating a high performing, psychologically safe team, contrary to popular belief and what's said in a lot of the famous leadership books. But it doesn't take years. I reckon it took me about 2 to 3, 4 months maximum. And then I recruited more people. I instilled the same kind of qualities. This is what I expect. So just to unpack it a bit further, you have to be clear on your expectation. And then you have to go there first yourself. There's no good me saying, I want X, Y, Z, and then doing the opposite, because then the team will just be totally confused, right? So every day it was showing up, showing them that I trust them and they can trust me. And then the only way I can prove that they can trust me, right, is when things went wrong or they didn't know what to do, I appeared and I give them the gift of time. And like I pointed to before, I was just there to listen to them. And they were quite shocked because they used to have managers in this particular region where I worked. It was the UAE, just to give you an example. They were used to people shouting, micromanagement, quite, I'll tell you what to do, and finger pointing. So it was quite a big shock for them to course correct into a different leadership style. And it was, not going to lie, it was a couple of months to be like, wow, okay, how long is this going to take? But like I said before, it's so rewarding when suddenly you see someone settle into feeling safe and then suddenly they just light up and then they're doing stuff based on their own ability, their own experience. And then, like I say, when things go wrong, the crucial bit is just be ready to give them feedback, but not to ram it down the throat, right? Just to pick a safe space. So, okay, how did that go? It didn't go so well. No problem. I've got your back. Let's sit down and unpack that. What can we do if you do that again? I'm not shouting at you. It's cool. It's not a problem, but let's try and avoid it happening in the future. Is a million miles away from me losing my temper and just standing there and bouncing them off the walls. And that's what they were used to, if I'm honest. And it's not just, I'm not blaming the Middle East though. I mean, it happened in the UK. I had some terrible bosses in my career as well. And I think that's what saved me. I seen a lot of leaders how not to do it, right? And I just promised myself that I would be the complete opposite. So thank you for those horrible bosses, I guess.
And I think, Peter, this is a great comment that at the end, it's much more powerful if you have a team that is intrinsically motivated of doing the right stuff and not being and working and reacting on fear. So one other aspect you mentioned in your last answer was that, if there's no meeting or if you just, let's say, reacted on not attending certain meetings. And I have also a policy: if there's no if there's no agenda, I'm not the attender, right? So if a meeting is not well prepared with a pre-read or post actions with clear next steps, I won't attend, right? Because it's waste of time. So in particular for large organizations, we all know that this is not likely to happen. So how you can, or how you support also your clients in just saying no. I always try to say to my team leads, and to also I've worked quite a bit with all my team members actually, that they are the ones that need to say no. It will be not the last guy of the line, it will be you as a project manager or team lead or whomever that needs to start saying no. No to a project, no to a next step, no to a decision, whatever. But it will be you. It will be not the last guy or last lady in the line. So, how do you foster those kind of attitudes, let's say, to people?
It's a great question because it's not that simple. However, I can tell you that I got it wrong in my early career because I ended up in heated discussions with people who were more senior than me. You know, I'm pulling rank and you are going to turn up and stuff like that. So once I learned that I got my fingers burnt a few times, the difference is that if you go in a non-violent, non-judgmental way, and as we said, just explain that, look, what's the tangible, you know, what are the tangible things about this meeting? Is it really worth us doing it? And just being honest. And yeah, there's still going to be times when you don't get your own way. But if you can instill that into your peers, into your team, we're all more likely when we, you know, set those meetings, we're going to be thinking, okay, is this really going to add value going forward? Is it really worth us having this every week, you know? And so many times in organizations that I work for, large ones, we did actually gain time back. But there was also situations where, you know, it just wasn't possible. And I'm not saying go out there and get fired just because you blank refuse to go and be in a meeting, but I'm just an advocate for getting time back because of the self-care piece, you know, and people. So this is the interesting thing. I hear very senior management teams saying they want their teams to be high performing, they want them to feel safe and included, and they don't want them to burn out. But then when I observe, you know, if I get a chance to see that, not so much now because it's remotely, yeah, there's a massive mismatch between, and it's innocent. I'm not saying there's no company I've met so far that's the big bad corporate, right? There's some amazing people in even the worst organization, but it's just about being honest with yourself. And like I say, the best leaders are the ones that go there first. And also they instill into the team that just because you're the boss doesn't mean that you can't be a self-leader. You know, you can be an amazing leader, but just being a great member of that team and being a collaborative leader, you know? So that means, for example, if I went into a meeting and, you know, we're all present, I expect everyone to just put the hand up and say, look, is this really beneficial to carry on? Or I think it's run its course. Let's give ourselves the gift of some time back. Go back to your people, you know, go and look after them and all of that. And actually, it's more crucial to do that now because we're all sitting at home. And I don't know about you, it just seems, I mean, okay, I haven't been in the corporate world for a while now, but it seems a bit strange to sit in those kind of meetings that we all had in the past that went on for hours when we're actually sitting in our own living room, you know? So it's probably easier now to have those conversations because I would hazard a guess that people who are the, you know, decision makers, or it's possible to actually sway them, are probably more open to getting time back. Because you've heard about Zoom fatigue. You see, I don't buy that. I'm not sure who made that up because for me, Zoom is a perfect tool. You know, if I didn't have Zoom, I wouldn't be able to do half the work with my clients, right? But again, it's picking the right kind of way to go into meetings, the right kind of energy. And I don't know if anyone's ever taught you about this, but if I go into a meeting freaking out or I'm uncomfortable and I'm not being authentic, even before I've opened my mouth, I've already set that meeting up for failure, or it's going to be quite challenging, right? Versus me being relaxed, being authentic and just being, okay, I'm listening, let's go. And I'm more likely to realize if I'm droning on, right? And then my team are like glazing over and it's like, okay, it's time to pull a plug on this. Anyone got anything else, you know? And a lot of the times I just see leaders feeling uncomfortable about closing them off, you know? So it really does not, you know, it's not just on the leader's back. If you instill this psychologically safe environment where people can dissent in a controlled way, you're more likely to get loving feedback. You know, someone might just give you a nudge and say, let's just pull the plug on this, you know? But yeah,
But
and
I
it's a
think
lot less uncomfortable just saying no, right? Yeah.
and I think like you said, so it's not that it's kind of I can't remember exactly the phrase that you use, but it's not just to break something. It's just to be respectful with each of our times or with each of our values. So to say no or to not attend to a meeting where you say that there are hundreds of people invited. So the calculated time of you saying something is seconds, milliseconds. It just doesn't make any sense, right? I remember the time when I was calculating the cost of a meeting, and I was telling it to my boss, and I said, look, this meeting costed us 15,000 euros without any pre-prep and without any post activities. Was it worth it? And he was kind of surprised that I was making the math. And I said, look, taking into consideration this is the salary of each guy for the hours, blah, blah, blah. He said, well, you're right. So it was the last time of those meetings. And I was happy because it was at the end me in calculating it and saying, no, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's also waste of the company that you're working for, right? You as a leader should take certain responsibility in driving the company forward. And I see many leaders, managers, people in general that like to invite a lot of people into meetings in order to I don't know, maybe convince themselves, well, they are all in now, and if we once have taken a decision now, everybody was having its part of the decision, so there's no conflict. But conflicts, I think, at the end are good, and it's good how to, but it's important how to deal with them. So maybe
yeah.
You can also give us a glimpse on that, right?
Well, yeah, it's conflicts will always be uncomfortable. That's the bad news. But the good news is that if you're willing to be a bit vulnerable, because it will always require vulnerability. And I think people get really confused about vulnerability because, whenever we bring it up in workshops, I can see people going, oh, here we go. We're talking about vulnerability. I want to hide, But it really is as simple as when things are not going your way, just hold your own. Just be there for your team, for your people. And again, it's the I can't even speak, individualistic behavior where, okay, I'm not feeling comfortable, so I'm going to run away. And the problem is we've all done that, it happens. So it's okay if you learn from it. But if you've spotted yourself doing that, it's asking yourself that honest question, saying, okay, what's all that about? What was so uncomfortable that's detracted from me dealing with this situation? And honestly, all of the situations where I thought, oh, I'm going into this, my team are heated, they're blaming me because my back was against the wall, what's going to happen? But because I stayed in that meeting and I give them the gift of time in that space, it's resolvable. Because like I said before, if it goes quiet, you've really got trouble. Leadership teams come to me because I used to work on engagement programs and they're like, what can I do? And I'm like, well, just listen. Forget wasting millions on these massive, big, clunky engagement surveys and all of that. If you're listening and you teach your managers, middle managers, all the way up to your CEO to listen, then you're going to spot stuff. And then crucially, when you spot it, even though you're like, oh, I don't want to discuss that, this seems like a can of worms. I'd rather take the can of worms any day of the week than people talking behind my back, or suddenly I've got to go begging because no one wants to say anything, right? Because we've all been in these meetings where it's really cringy, right? Where someone's in there saying, well, what's going on? I'm not hearing anything. And you know why? Because everyone's really annoyed. They don't feel safe to be able to be truthful and dissent or say what they really mean. And then everyone just sits and waits, and it's a horrible silence, and silence can be okay. But what I'm saying is I'd rather have a bit of heat and someone saying, well, we're not happy with this. And even though in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, here we go. Something's going to happen. You'd be surprised if you're just willing to go there. There's always a solution. And even if there isn't, there's times when I had to adjourn meetings because I honestly would say, look, we're not getting anywhere, but not a problem. I've got your back still. I know you're still annoyed, but let's adjourn for today because it got heated, and then just say to them, look, I'm not washing my hands of this. Let's pick another time when we've calmed down again, and we're going to address it. We're going to bring that back on the table, and I'm listening. And it's totally fine,
Peter, the gift by doing so is that the tensions are there anyway. There may be underneath the surface, and if there's, if the tensions between the people and having the problem not solved publicly, in saying no, or to have the let's say the friction discussed, it happens maybe during the project, right? That the project manager and the other project manager, they are fighting between each other, but they have never really talked. We are all human beings, so I think I'm always a fan of, if you have a problem, get into a room, shake it, discuss it, and then come out and it's resolved. Because at the end, the friction is there. And I think, like you said, it's important to give room for that friction to be resolved.
And you know, the other parts of that, I don't know if you've thought about this, but when people tell me they don't like this, again, you've got to put your coaching hat on, right? So any good leader knows, okay, is that really true? You know, and you take it with a pinch of salt, but also, as we agreed, right, you don't detract and act as if it's not real to them, because regardless of whether you agree or not, there's always a grain of truth in anything, right? So for me, it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and then I'm gonna sit on that. You know, I'm gonna reflect. I'm gonna let that percolate, because is it they just don't like the coffee, or is there something really tangible in what we're doing and we need to change it? Because I see lots of organizations, and it's good that they're trying, because they honestly want to have a better experience for their employees, right? But I see many knee-jerk reactions from engagement surveys where people are just annoyed or pissed off in the moment, right? So they mock the team down or this and that. And I'm always curious about that, because I'm like, okay, is it just been because there's been a weird quarter where things got out of hand and they're just they're lashing out? Or, you know, what is that deeper problem? You know, is there a systemic something there tangible that we can work on and really start to chip away at that? So it's always thinking about, okay, let's not panic and spend even more money trying to resolve something that maybe in a couple of months' time, it's not even a thing. And that requires, again, patience, time, and also knowing to trust yourself that, you know, even though you think, okay, I want to resolve this, it's an uncomfortable situation. Let's see how this plays out. And again, having, you know, I know it seems obvious, but again, giving people a gift of time and checking in again, say, right, I know you were annoyed by this, and this came out as the top, you know, few things to resolve, but is it really true now? You know, have things settled down? What else is there, you know? And you'd be surprised, because a lot of things just end up naturally being resolved out of the wash, and then you're on to the next thing. Versus, like I said, what I've normally seen is people, okay, that's it, and then they make huge changes and then set up one big change project, only to find out not even halfway through that that's not it, right?
Peter, I fear we could talk about in hours about that. So let me maybe finish up with asking you the question: what would you have said to the younger Peter, or the younger yourself, when you started your career, in order to not go into this trade?
I like that one. Definitely to listen, like I said, listen to myself, you know, to my own wisdom, and check in and ask myself the questions I pointed at, you know, is that really true? What's really going on? You know, do I really need to knee-jerk react because of emotion, right? And the second bit is, again, patience, patience, because we all want to go fast, right? We've all got pressure. There's a time suck piece to it, you know, there's KPIs and targets and all of that. But the more that I slowed down later in my career, actually, the more work I got done, because I was less likely to rush into something and then end up with a mess that I had to work on later on, right?
Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
I love that, Peter. Thanks so much for being our guest today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Go for Leadership, the podcast.